Why was the range so loud? Until the moment she stood. The air at Falcon Point Mountain View wasn't quiet. It rattled with gunfire, laughter, and the sharp edge of arrogance. Brass clinked across the gravel. Young men in spotless camouflage shouted at one another over missed shots, filling the space with excuses and bravado. They'd all failed, every last one of them. Targets at distance still stood clean, untouched, as if mocking the attempts. And then came the voice that silenced them all. "Any snipers here?" Range Officer John Garrison barked it out. His words bit the air like gravel poured from a steel bucket. The man was a Vietnam veteran, old enough to have seen too much, too tired to hide his sarcasm. After 12 misses in a row, he was out of patience. His eyes swept across the line, daring anyone to answer. Nobody did. Not the college kids with their high-dollar rifles. Not the weekend warriors who'd shown up to impress girlfriends or brag online. They shifted, chuckled, let the joke pass. Until a chair scraped from the back corner. She set down her coffee. No hesitation, no performance, just a simple, decisive movement. A young woman, sandy blonde hair tied back, boots dusty from work, a plain flannel shirt, nothing flashy. Emily Carter, 28. Small-town girl by appearance but carrying a silence that didn't match her age. The laughter started before she even reached the line. "You here for the beginner safety course, sweetheart," one called out. "Better stick to the close targets," another smirked. "You won't even understand half the words," sneered Derek Mason, a competitor with styled blonde hair and the kind of confidence that only ever came from never being tested. She didn't answer, she didn't need to. Because she'd already heard worse. Afghanistan had given her thicker armor than any words could penetrate. The crowd followed her with their eyes, waiting for a stumble, a crack in her steps, anything to justify their grins. Instead, Emily walked straight to the rack of rental rifles. Calm, measured, the way you'd expect someone to choose a wrench, not a weapon. Her hand found a plain Remington 700 in .308. No custom work, no chrome finish, no expensive scope worth bragging about. Just a tool. Garrison raised an eyebrow. He'd seen posturing before, thousands of loudmouths talking a bigger game than their hands could deliver. But her posture, something about it froze him. The steadiness, the lack of hurry, the absence of any need to prove herself with words. He remembered men like that in country, the ones who did their work silently. "What distance you want?" he asked, tone still sharp but his eyes more curious now. Her answer came flat, steady. 4,000 meters. It was as if the entire range inhaled and forgot to breathe again. 4,000. That wasn't just distance. That was absurdity. Impossible, at least for a stock hunting rifle. Derek Mason laughed out loud, shaking his head. "Lady, you're joking. I can't even manage half that with a custom rig. 4,000. That's over 2.5 miles. You wouldn't even know how to adjust for wind shear, let alone parallax. You don't even." But his voice faded, because Emily wasn't listening. She was already laying prone, already adjusting the bipod, already sinking into a rhythm her body remembered better than her mind wanted it to. Dr. Michael Gray, a retired Army physician who spent more time spotting than shooting these days, leaned over and quietly set up his scope. His voice, calm and respectful, broke the tense silence. "I'll spot for her." Nobody laughed at him, because they could see the way his eyes locked onto Emily, not as a stranger, not as a farm girl out of her depth, but as someone familiar. He'd seen that look before in soldiers who'd carried rifles for more than sport. John Garrison grunted. He didn't argue. Instead, he climbed onto his ATV, grabbed an orange safety cone and drove it all the way out. The crowd shaded their eyes, watching him ride into the distance until he was just a speck against the far ridge. 4,200 meters. He dropped the cone, center, a tiny spot of color against a world of green and brown. When he returned, a small crowd had already gathered. Word had traveled. Phones hovered in hands. People smelled humiliation coming and they wanted to capture it. But Emily Carter wasn't there to give them that. She settled behind the scope, adjusted cheek weld, let her body weight melt into the dirt, and then she went still. The kind of still that only comes from years of doing this in places where stillness meant life. Wind, 8 to 10 meters per second from the northwest, Dr. Gray called out, his tone clinical. Emily didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her eyes tracked the grass bending on distant slopes, the shimmer of heat over rock, even the slow arc of birds riding invisible currents. Afghanistan had taught her to see the whispers of the environment. It always spoke, if you knew how to listen. Her finger found the trigger. She exhaled halfway, stilled her heart. And fired. The rifle cracked. The recoil pressed against her shoulder. Then came the wait. 2.5 seconds that stretched longer than any 2.5 seconds she'd ever lived. The cone, distant and small, wavered in the shimmering heat. Then the spotter's voice, sharp, certain. Impact dead center. Gasps exploded. A dozen voices broke into disbelief. Phones shook in hands trying to confirm what eyes already knew. Garrison's radio crackled from the ridge. His voice, for once trembling, carried back. Cone down, hole right through the middle. I've got the fragment in my hand. The impossible had just happened. And yet she didn't smile, didn't celebrate, didn't even nod. She simply cycled the bolt, pocketed the brass, as if the shot hadn't been a miracle but a memory. Because to her it was. Years of combat, years of survival, years of learning that a trigger could mean the difference between a man coming home and a man never seeing his family again. The silence afterward was heavier than any explosion. Then came the question that cut sharper than the shot itself. Where'd you learn to shoot like that? Juan Ramirez, an Iraq veteran who'd known her family for years, asked softly. He already knew the answer in a way. The veterans in the crowd did too. They saw it in her eyes, the flicker of something carried and buried, not bragged about. Emily's reply was just 3 words. Here and there. But everyone who had served heard the weight between those words. The arrogance had drained from Derek Mason's face. His friend Sam Porter stared with awe. Brad, the third of their trio, fumbled desperately to film the cone as proof that what they'd witnessed wasn't just a collective hallucination. And still, she offered them nothing more. No explanation, no admission. Because the truth wasn't theirs to take. It was hers to carry. And carrying it had nearly broken her once already. So she stood, shouldered her bag, and walked, leaving behind a stunned crowd, a shattered cone, and a room full of questions that would follow her long after the echo of that shot died in the valley. But Emily Carter didn't fire that impossible round for them. She did it for herself, to steady her hands, to silence the ghosts, to remind herself she still could. What she didn't know yet was that the shot wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The moment she stepped into the gravel lot and turned toward her old pickup truck, she felt it, the shift. The world had just seen her. The secret she had buried in flannel and silence had cracked open. And now there would be questions. Why didn't she just keep driving? The gravel popped under her truck's tires, but the sound couldn't drown out the noise in her head. Emily Carter had left the range, but the range hadn't left her. The cone was still out there on that ridge, leaning sideways, shattered at the center. The veteran's stares were still burned into her. The way Dr. Gray had looked at her, not surprised, not shocked, just knowing. That was the worst part. Because recognition was harder to walk away from than mockery. Her fingers tapped the wheel. The air smelled faintly of gun oil, even though the rifle she'd rented wasn't hers. It clung to her like it always did after a shot, sharp, metallic, impossible to scrub from memory. She drove faster, as if speed could put distance between her and the questions she'd left behind. But she knew it wouldn't. because questions spread faster than wind in a valley. By the time she pulled into the driveway, the Flathead Mountains looming dark against the pewter sky, she could already feel the weight waiting for her. Her grandmother stood on the porch, Vera Carter, 65, strong as iron, shoulders still squared like the teacher she'd been for decades, a mug in her hand, steam fatting into the twilight, watching, always watching. "You're later than usual," Vera said, not sharp, not surprised, just steady as if she'd already calculated the why. Emily climbed out, boots hitting the dirt with more force than she meant. She dropped her rifle case on the porch step, even though it was empty. Her pulse was still running from the shot, from the silence after. "The range was busy," she said, voice short, clipped. It was the truth, but not the truth Vera wanted. Her grandmother studied her with that slow, patient gaze Emily had grown up under, the kind of gaze that scraped away layers without ever needing to raise a voice. "Betty called," Vera finally said, her words deliberate. "Said you made quite an impression today." Emily let out a sound that almost resembled a laugh, but caught in her throat before it could escape. "I made a long shot." That was all she gave, simple, unembellished. But her grandmother heard the storm behind it. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and onions, the steady comfort of a kitchen that had fed generations. They sat, two mugs between them, the lamplight soft but heavy with the kind of truth that didn't like to stay buried. "Emily Marie," Vera said, using the middle name like she had when Emily was a child and trouble had consequences. Emily stiffened. She knew what was coming. "What did you do today?" Her lungs loosened like steel giving way. She stared at the steam curling from the mug in her hands, following the shape it made, delaying the inevitable. "I hit 4,000 meters." The words dropped into the room like ordnance, heavy, final. Vera's lips pressed tight, her knuckles whitened against the mug. She didn't gasp, didn't shake her head. She absorbed it like a woman who had long ago accepted the cost of courage. "That's not target practice," she said quietly. "That's precision, and precision like that, it comes from training." The silence that followed stretched, brittle, until Vera asked the question Emily had avoided for years. "Emily, did you serve?" It was the moment Emily had rehearsed without ever preparing. The words lodged behind her teeth. She felt them coil like a map folding open in her chest. "Yes." One word, small, but it rearranged everything in the room. She didn't stop, couldn't. 3 tour Army Rangers, recon, Afghanistan. The confession slammed down between them, unmovable. Vera closed her eyes for a moment, as if weighing not just the words but the weight of everything unsaid. When she opened them again, they shimmered. "You should have told me." Not accusation, not anger, just ache. "You didn't have to carry that alone." Emily shifted, shoulders heavy. "I wanted peace," she whispered. "I wanted quiet. I thought if I came back here, split wood, fed cows, maybe the nightmares would fade. Maybe the world would let me stay small." Vera reached across the table, her hand warm, steady. She took Emily's hand in hers. "You can't hide a rifle in a closet, child," she said softly. "Not the one you carry inside." Emily's throat tightened, her chest ached. And so the story came out, not in speeches, not in glory, but in fragments, like soldiers' brief after an operation, short, clinical, almost detached. She told of ridge lines and nights stretched thin under radio silence, of reading wind and distance like a language, of pulling the trigger to save lives, of pulling it when she didn't want to, of friends who didn't come home, of the rules that had said when to fire and when to hold, and the weight of knowing neither rule erased the ghosts. Vera didn't flinch. She listened the way she'd listened to students read aloud in classrooms, cataloging each syllable, holding every detail as if it was her duty to protect it. And when Emily's voice faltered, Vera only squeezed her hand tighter. "You came home," she said. "That counts for something." The kitchen fell quiet except for the creak of the house settling, the distant sound of cattle shifting in the fields. But quiet didn't mean peace. Not tonight. Because what Emily didn't know when she pulled that trigger wasn't just that people would talk. It was that people were already talking. Vera broke the silence first, her tone shifting, careful. "That shot at Mountain View," she said. "You drew attention." Emily set her mug down, steady. She'd known the fallout would come, but hearing it spoken out loud made it real. "They'll talk," she admitted. "It's what people do." Vera shook her head slowly. "This isn't just talk. Susan Knight from the paper came by, and Donovan Westfield, he's been asking questions." The name dropped into the room heavier than the shot had. Westfield, developer, wealthy, polished, dangerous in ways money makes people dangerous. Emily's jaw tightened. "The Riverside Project." Vera nodded, her mouth pressed in a line. "They want a corridor through the Jackson property, and your grandmother's 40 acres sit right in their path. They've been sending letters, making calls. Juan said strangers were asking questions about our land just last night." Emily leaned back, exhaling slow. She hadn't asked for this fight, she just wanted steady hands, a little quiet. But men like Westfield didn't stop at polite offers. Her eyes lifted, steady again. "I don't want Grandma dragged into this." Vera's face softened, but her voice stayed sharp. "You already dragged her in. That shot, people saw, and now they'll see you, not just as a ranch girl, as something else." Emily's pulse quickened. She thought of the veterans at the range. The way they looked at her, not with shock but with recognition. She thought of Dr. Gray's quiet words, of Juan Ramirez's warning outside the truck. "You sure about letting them see that? Folks talk, word spreads fast." He'd been right. And now she wasn't just Emily Carter anymore. She was a soldier again, whether she wanted it or not. Outside, a pickup crunched down the driveway. Its headlights cut through the kitchen window. Emily stiffened, instinct sharp. But when the door opened, it was Juan Ramirez. Coat zipped, eyes serious. "They moved the hearings up," he said without preamble. "Friday, they're trying to rush it." Emily's heart thudded once, heavy. So soon? Westfield wasn't wasting time. "They accelerate when they think they're racing the clock," she said, voice cooling into something steadier. "Classic move." Juan nodded grimly. "Carl Foster's calling a meeting. Copper Dollar Tavern. Veterans, neighbors, they want you there. People saw what you did at the range. They're asking about leadership." Leadership. The word sat like stone in her chest. She'd buried leadership. She walked away from it when she came home. She'd chosen chores over command, quiet over orders. And now it was clawing its way back. Vera's eyes met hers across the table. No words, just a steady truth written in her gaze. "You already know what you have to do." Emily exhaled slow, felt the choice tightening around her. "All right," she said finally. "We meet, but we keep it small, quiet, no talk that can be twisted." Juan's jaw eased just slightly. He nodded. "Carl's in, Dr. Gray too, they'll listen." Emily leaned back, her hands folded around the mug again. The warmth seeped into her palms, but it didn't soften the steel building in her chest. Because she knew the truth she'd been avoiding. Sometimes you don't choose the fight. Sometimes the fight chooses you. And the line she thought she'd left behind in Afghanistan was already forming again. Right here, on her family's land. Why did every eye turn when she walked in? The Copper Dollar Tavern wasn't much. Brick walls, scarred tables, smoke-stained ceilings from a time when ashtrays sat at every corner. It had seen cattle booms and mining strikes, family feuds and reconciliations. But tonight, the back room carried a different weight. Not the weight of drunks or gossip. The weight of veterans and landowners with nowhere else to turn. The mismatched chairs circled the table, some filled, some waiting. Men and women sat with arms crossed, faces tight. They weren't here for beer. They were here because the county clock was ticking and Westfield's people were already pushing hard. When Emily Carter walked in, the room went quiet. It wasn't her boots on the floorboards. It wasn't the flannel shirt or the plain jeans. It was something else. The fact that every person in that room had already heard, some had seen, that impossible shot. And with it, the weight of a truth none of them could ignore anymore. She wasn't just another ranch girl. Juan Ramirez rose to his feet first. His voice carried the respect of one soldier introducing another. "Gentlemen, this is Emily Carter. You all heard about the shot." Chairs scraped as heads turned. Carl Foster, the Marine veteran who ran the hardware store, motioned toward the empty chair beside him. His jaw was square, his eyes sharp. "Sit, Miss Carter. We've been waiting to hear what you've got to say." She slid into the seat. The smell of coffee, stale smoke, and cold wood pressed close. Her hands folded together. She felt every eye studying her, measuring her. Dr. Michael Gray leaned forward, his voice calm but weighted. "We're not here for glory. We're here because Westfield's people are moving fast. Fences cut, windows smashed, calls made, deputies looking the other way. With the hearing pushed up to Friday, we're running out of time." Carl tapped a thick finger on the table. "Tommy Mitchell overheard talk at the bar 2 nights ago. Outsiders asking about military backgrounds, asking if any of us would resist. That's not business talk. That's recon." The word dropped heavy. Pete Wilson, an old Korean War vet, cleared his throat. His body had aged, but his eyes still carried steel. "I've seen it before. Back when the mine companies came for land, they didn't just send lawyers, they sent enforcers. You don't reason with people like that, you prepare." The word prepare settled like iron in the room. But no one moved, because everyone knew who they were waiting on. Frank Torres, a former Ranger turned high school coach, broke the silence. His voice was firm, his eyes locked on her. "You haven't said a word since you walked in, Miss Carter, but you've done something none of us have seen in years. What do you think?" Every head turned. Emily straightened without thinking. The posture of a briefing tent came back, uninvited but unshakable. She stared down into her coffee, then lifted her eyes. "I think you're all treating this like a political fight," she said evenly. "But what Tommy overheard, that wasn't politics. That was reconnaissance, testing our response, probing weak spots, classic pattern." A heavy silence followed. Carl leaned back, exhaling slow. "So you're saying—" "I'm saying," she cut in, her voice sharpening, "we need to treat this like they are. Organized, prepared. Not for violence if we can avoid it, but for escalation if they bring it." Frank's fingers drummed on the table, his instincts aligned with hers. "You're talking about comms, rotations, contingency plans." Emily nodded once. "Exactly. They've already accelerated the county meeting. That's battlefield initiative. If we stay scattered, they'll pick us apart. But if we move like a unit, even just enough to protect one another, they'll think twice." Dr. Gray studied her, his eyes unreadable but deep. "That's leadership talking, and leadership carries weight. Are you ready for that burden again?" Her throat tightened, his words cut sharper than he knew. Because she'd buried leadership when she came home, buried it in woodpiles, in fence mending, in long nights trying to forget. She had sworn never to carry command again. But she looked around the table at Carl's weathered hands, at old Pete's trembling cane, at Juan's quiet scars. The answer was already written. "I didn't ask for it," she said softly. "But if they come after this land, my family, this community, I won't stand down." Carl's palm hit the table with a crack. "Then we're agreed." Heads nodded, quiet men, hard men, each with their own war behind them, different conflicts, same oath. Protect the ground beneath your boots, protect the people beside you. The next 2 hours were spent in low voices, carving order out of chaos. Who would keep eyes on which roads? Who still had radios that worked? which neighbors needed watching, which barns could hold supplies. Frank drafted a patrol rotation. Carl offered his basement for a supply cache. Old Pete suggested a phone tree with code words. Through it all, Emily spoke when needed, firm when correcting, quiet when listening. She wasn't barking orders. She wasn't posturing. She was building structure the way soldiers do, so fear doesn't eat through the seams. When the meeting wound down, Pete lifted his cup in a trembling salute. Different enemy, different ground, same duty. The words caught, and then the room echoed him. Same duty. Emily drove home in the dark, the Montana sky a wide black canvas above her. The tires hummed. Her mind hummed louder. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't wanted eyes on her again, hadn't wanted to stand at the center of anything. But once again, the world had put responsibility in her hands. The porch light glowed ahead, steady against the night. Vera stood there, waiting as always. "How did it go?" she asked when Emily stepped out. Emily looked at her, at the house, at the land stretching behind. She let out a long, low breath. "Like stepping back into uniform," she said. "Different enemy, same fight." Vera nodded, eyes soft, knowing. "And you'll carry it again, won't you?" Emily's gaze drifted past her, to the horizon. "I'm about to find out," she whispered. By Friday morning, the valley was no longer the same. Word of Emily Carter's shot had spread not just through Mountain View, not just in the tavern's back room. It had spread through diners, feed stores, radio chatter, Facebook groups, and Sunday gossip at church. With attention came pushback. It started small. A fence cut at the Jackson property. Cows wandering loose onto the highway, spooking a neighbor's truck into a ditch. Deputies shrugged it off. "Kids," they said, but the cut was clean, too clean, bolt cutters, not laziness. Then came the calls. Landowners answering phones to hear masked voices warning them to sell or lose everything. Vera received 2 in one night. Emily answered the third. She listened to the voice hiss threats about what would happen if they didn't take the deal. She didn't speak, didn't hang up, just let the silence stretch until the caller's courage bled away and the line went dead. By Sunday, it escalated again. Juan Ramirez was pulled over 3 times in one day. Deputies citing cracked taillights that didn't exist. Carl Foster found his hardware store window smashed, cash untouched, but his veteran flag ripped down and stomped into the mud. These weren't random acts. They were signals. That night the veterans gathered again at the Copper Dollar. The room was heavier this time. Carl's fists clenched on the table. Juan's voice was tight, anger coiled but controlled. Old Pete shook his head, muttering that some fights never change. Only the uniforms do. Emily listened, quiet, face carved into something harder than usual. Because she recognized the rhythm. This wasn't random harassment. It was the same pattern she'd seen in Kandahar: probes before pressure, intimidation before escalation. "They're softening us," she said finally, her voice flat. "Breaking lines, sowing fear, testing responses, classic pattern." Frank leaned in. "So what do? We can't outgun deputies and lawyers. We can't look like some militia." Emily's eyes lifted, hard, unwavering. "We don't need to look like anything. We need discipline. That's what wins campaigns. We don't scatter, we don't react on impulse. We prepare quietly, methodically. That's how we survive." Her tone left no room for doubt. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't speech. It was the calm of someone who'd been there before and lived to tell it. Carl's jaw worked, his fists clenched. "But if they put hands on one of us—" Emily cut him off with a glance sharp enough to slice. "Then we document, we protect, and if it comes to it, we stand together, but we don't give them the excuse they're fishing for." Silence, then nods. They wanted to fight back. She could feel it in the room, but she was teaching them something harder: restraint. Back at the ranch, Vera stood steady, but Emily saw the worry in her eyes. Men in trucks slowed too long at the road. The phone rang late. Emily doubled patrols. She and Juan split nights, walking fence lines under starlight with rifles slung across their backs, not as threats, as reminders to themselves as much as anyone else. One night under the cold glitter of stars, Juan broke the silence. "You didn't want this, did you?" Emily shook her head. "I wanted peace." "Then why not walk away?" Her breath hung in the night air. She thought of her grandfather's words, burned into her bones years ago. "Some things don't belong to you to walk away from." "Because if they take her land," Emily said softly, "it's gone forever, and I can't watch that happen to her." Juan didn't press. He just nodded. Soldiers understood silence better than words. Why didn't she just stay in the back row? The county courthouse smelled of dust, old paper, and nerves. The chambers weren't built for conflict, but that morning they carried it like a loaded rifle. The wooden benches creaked as ranchers, clerks, and townsfolk filled them. Some wore work boots still dusted from chores. Others wore ties they hadn't put on in years. All carried opinions sharpened by whispers. Emily Carter slipped into the back row. Plain clothes, no insignia, no sign of the uniform she'd left behind years ago. She didn't come to speak, she came to listen, to measure. Then Donovan Westfield walked in. Tall, polished, suit pressed sharp as glass, his voice smooth enough to sell ice in a Montana winter. He stepped to the front, carrying a smile that had been rehearsed in mirrors and boardrooms. He painted pictures with words: jobs, tourism, prosperity. He spoke of revenue, of opportunity, of progress. His voice rolled like honey across the chamber, and some faces leaned forward, nodding, hungry for the promise. Until he reached the part that mattered most. "Certain parcels," he said, pausing for effect, "remain underutilized, wasted potential. With vision, these acres could be transformed into something better, something greater." Underutilized. The word tightened Emily's chest. He was talking about her grandmother's land, about the soil her grandfather had bled on, the porch light that had waited for her through 3 tours overseas, the cattle she still fed at dawn. Her knuckles whitened against the bench. The commissioners shifted, uneasy. They knew the room was split. Some welcomed Westfield's money, others feared his shadow. The tension swelled until Westfield's lawyer rose, slim, sly, glasses reflecting the light. "We've also received troubling reports," he said, his voice dripping with concern, "of paramilitary gatherings in the county. Veterans arming, training, preparing. This project isn't just about land, it's about ensuring safety for our community." A hush fell, heads turned, eyes swept the room searching. And that was when Emily stood. Her heart hammered, but her voice was steady, clear. "With respect," she said, cutting through the silence, "you're misrepresenting." All eyes locked on her. "What you call paramilitary," she continued, her gaze sharp, "is nothing more than a handful of veterans meeting quietly, neighbors protecting homes from intimidation. That's not a threat. That's survival." The lawyer's lips parted, but Westfield raised a hand. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened, narrowing in on her like a predator finding prey. "And you are?" he asked. For half a breath she hesitated. She could have said nothing, could have slipped back into the bench and disappeared. But then her jaw tightened. "Emily Carter, U.S. Army veteran. My family's land is what you're talking about, and we won't be bullied off it." The ripple that followed moved like a wave. Some faces lit with recognition, some with admiration, a few with fear. And for the first time in years, her name wasn't whispered in silence. It was spoken aloud, attached to her service, to her skills, to her refusal to bend. Westfield's smile faltered just for a fraction, then returned smooth as glass. But she had seen it, the crack, the anger behind the charm. The commissioners shuffled, clearing throats, fumbling papers. The meeting staggered on, but the air was changed, because Emily Carter had stood. When it ended, she left quickly. Eyes followed her out, some curious, some calculating, some already planning to spread what they'd just seen. Outside, the autumn air hit sharp against her skin. The courthouse steps stretched before her, heavy with whispers. Juan Ramirez caught up, his boots striking the stone. His voice was low, steady. "You realize what you just did?" Emily's eyes stayed forward. "All I did was tell the truth." Juan shook his head. "You stood up, and now they'll come harder." She didn't answer, because he was right. That night, the ranch was too quiet. Vera found her on the porch, staring into the dark like she had on so many nights overseas. "You stood up," Vera said softly. Emily nodded. "Now they'll come harder." Her grandmother's hand rested on her shoulder, grounding her. "Then you'll stand harder." Emily swallowed, eyes burning. She wanted peace, but peace had already been stripped from her. The fight wasn't coming, it was here. It began small, as it always does. Headlights sweeping across the ranch long after midnight, engines idling at the gate before peeling away. By morning, they found a dead calf dumped on the property line. No note, no claim, just a message. Emily buried it herself. No words, no tears, just the steady work of someone who had learned how to bury things without ceremony. By Thursday, Vera pressed her hand over Emily's at breakfast. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "They're trying to wear you down," she said. "But I see what's happening. People are looking at you different now. They're waiting." Emily met her eyes. "Waiting for what?" "For you to lead." The word sat heavy in Emily's stomach. She'd sworn off leadership when she came home. Leadership meant lives in your hands. Leadership meant names you carried when they didn't come back. But here it was again, arriving not as a choice but as a demand. That evening, the Copper Dollar's back room was fuller than before. Not just veterans now, younger ranchers, store clerks, townsfolk who had never worn a uniform. They came with arms folded, questions sharp, eyes turned to her. Carl Foster rose, his voice heavy. "They're hitting harder every night. We can't keep playing defense." Old Pete shook his head, his cane tapping once on the floor. "Careful, son, that's how they want us, angry, reckless. Give them an excuse and they'll bury us." The room turned to Emily. She felt their stares, felt the weight building in her chest again. Her voice came steady, though her pulse hammered. "You're right, we can't lash out, but we can't scatter either. What we can do is stand together, publicly, peacefully. If we show them we're not alone, that the valley is watching, they'll think twice." A murmur rippled. "How?" someone asked. Emily drew a slow breath. "We hold the line, at the ranch, tomorrow morning. Everyone who believes this land is worth protecting, stand with us. Not with guns, not with fists, with presence, with witness. If they want to move us, they'll have to move all of us." Silence, then nods. One by one. Veterans, ranchers, townsfolk. Agreement spreading like fire across dry grass. Dawn broke cold and sharp the next day. The Carter Ranch stood quiet, the field stretching wide. But by mid-morning, pickup trucks lined the road. Men and women gathered at the fence line. Some carried flags, others only thermoses of coffee. They weren't here for spectacle. They were here to be counted. The veterans stood near the front, silent and immovable, their presence heavier than any weapon. Emily stood on the porch beside Vera. No uniform, no medals, just flannel and boots, but her posture was unmistakable. She belonged to the line, always had. Engines approached, black SUVs, sheriff's cruisers, a Cadillac polished so bright it seemed obscene against the dirt road. Donovan Westfield stepped out, smooth, smiling, but sharper now, edges showing. "This is trespassing," he declared, his voice loud, practiced. "You're obstructing progress, standing in the way of jobs, of prosperity." Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Emily stepped forward, her voice carrying clear across the pasture. This is home, this is sacrifice. And this, she swept her arm toward the rows of neighbors, veterans, families. This is a community that won't be bullied. The deputies shifted, uncomfortable. Cameras from local news rolled, catching every twitch, every silence. Old Pete raised his cane in a trembling salute. Carl Foster planted his boots like oak. Juan Ramirez folded his arms, a living wall. And then, as if on cue, the crowd lifted their hands in salute. Not sloppy, not playful, solemn, deliberate. 100 hands rising in silent unity behind Emily Carter. For the first time, Donovan Westfield had no words. He turned, barked something sharp to his men, and climbed back into his Cadillac. The convoy rolled away under the sound of shutters clicking, the stares of a community that had drawn its line. That evening, as the sun bled into the mountains, Emily sat on the porch steps. Juan dropped beside her, handing her a beer. "You realize what you did today, right?" he asked. She shook her head. "All I did was stand still." Juan chuckled, shaking his head. "Sometimes standing still is the hardest fight of all." Vera came out, resting a hand on Emily's shoulder. "You carried it, child, just like your grandfather would have wanted, just like the army trained you to, but you carried it without losing yourself." Emily let the words settle. For the first time in years, the weight inside her chest felt lighter, not gone, but lighter. The war she carried wasn't over, but maybe it had found purpose again. She looked out across the fields, the cattle, the land her family had built. And for once, the horizon didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like home worth fighting for. Why did silence weigh heavier than bullets? The valley looked the same, but Emily Carter knew it was. The hills rolled, the cottonwoods whispered, the cattle moved with slow indifference. But under that quiet, something had shifted. The courthouse confrontation, the stand at the ranch, the cameras, those things lingered. They clung like dust, invisible but inescapable. By Monday morning, her name was in the Flathead Gazette. Veteran sharpshooter defies developer. The photo was grainy, pulled from someone's phone, but it showed her standing on the porch, shoulders squared, community behind her. Emily hated it. Because the picture didn't show the knights packing fences with Juan, ears straining at every distant engine. It didn't show Vera's quiet sighs over morning coffee, the lines deepening at the corners of her eyes. It didn't show the way Emily woke every dawn with the same ache in her chest, the ache of command she never wanted again. Attention is a weight, and she was carrying it all over again. By Tuesday, the harassment returned. This time louder, bolder, trucks idled longer at the ranch gate. Calls came late into the night, threats more specific. Juan's tires were slashed outside the feed store. Carl Foster's dog was poisoned. The deputies shrugged again, their indifference sharp as betrayal. At breakfast, Vera set her hand on Emily's. Her voice was soft, but it carried the steel that had raised generations. "They're not trying to hurt the land," she said. "They're trying to break you." Emily looked down at her plate, untouched. "They'll try." Vera's hand tightened. "Child, they already are." The quiet after that cut deep. That night Emily sat on the porch alone, rifle across her lap, though she hadn't chambered around. The stars stretched overhead, clear and cold. She thought of Afghanistan, of nights in the Hindu Kush, waiting, listening for movement in the dark, knowing the enemy was testing the wire, waiting for her to blink. And now here, half a world away, it felt the same. Only this time, the war wasn't against insurgents. It was against men in suits and deputies in uniform, and that made it harder because the rules blurred. Her chest tightened, a thought she hated pushed through. What if I can't protect them? The ranch, Vera, the neighbors who had stood with her. It was one thing to risk her own life, another to risk theirs. The old nightmares stirred, the ones of men she hadn't saved, of orders she'd given that carried consequences she couldn't undo. Her throat constricted. Her hands trembled just slightly on the rifle. She closed her eyes, took a breath, tried to steady. But the ghosts didn't leave. By midweek, the Copper Dollar's back room was overflowing. Not just veterans and ranchers this time, store clerks, church elders, even young kids who'd grown up in the valley and didn't want to see it carved into a resort corridor. The room buzzed with anger. They cut the Jacksons' water line, one man spat. They smashed out Mitchell's truck windows, another added. My boy was followed home from school by strangers, a woman said, her voice shaking. Voices rose, fists pounded the table, the air grew hot with rage. Carl Foster slammed his hand down hard. We can't just take this, we've got to hit back. Old Pete shook his head, his cane tapping like punctuation. You hit back, you hand them the excuse they're waiting for. The room turned, as always, to Emily. Her chest tightened. She hated the way it happened, how silence turned to expectation, how eyes landed on her like weight. But she knew what was required. Her voice came even steady. They want us angry, reckless. That's their plan, push us until we snap. Then they get to point, call us dangerous, and bring the law down on us. We don't give them that. Someone shouted, so we just stand here and let them keep hitting us. Emily's jaw tightened. No, we stand together, stronger, louder, but peaceful. They win if we break. They lose if we hold. The room simmered. Some nodded, reluctant. Some clenched jaws, not ready to swallow restraint. But slowly the storm bent to her words. Because she spoke with a tone they recognized. The tone of someone who had seen campaigns like this before. Later that night, Juan found her leaning against the tavern wall, the cool air pressing against her flushed face. You're carrying it again, he said softly. Emily didn't look at him. Someone has to. Juan shook his head. You don't have to, you're choosing to. Her jaw worked. Maybe, she paused, but some things don't feel like choices. Some things feel like gravity. Juan studied her. The porch light caught the scars at his temple, the weight in his eyes. You're afraid, he said quietly. Emily's chest rose, fell. Every day, she admitted. It was the first time she'd said it out loud since coming home. Juan nodded, not surprised. Good, he said, means you're still human. For a moment, silence stretched between them, not empty but alive. Two soldiers sharing what civilians never could. By Thursday, Westfield made his move again. A new ad ran on local radio, slick, polished, filled with promises of jobs and progress. But halfway through, the tone shifted. Reports of armed gatherings, dangerous elements refusing to compromise. Is this the future we want for our children? Emily's stomach turned as she listened from the truck, her own words twisted, her own community painted as threat. She turned the radio off, gripping the wheel until her knuckles whitened. The war had shifted fronts. It wasn't just intimidation in the night anymore. It was narrative. And in many ways, narrative cut deeper than knives. That evening, Vera found Emily sitting in the barn, boots planted in dirt, forehead pressed to her hands. You can't carry it all, Vera said gently. Emily looked up, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. I don't know how to stop. Vera sat beside her, her voice quiet but steady. Your grandfather used to say, dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't argue, it just stands. Maybe that's what you're doing, child, just standing, and maybe that's enough. Emily swallowed, throat tight. Sometimes standing feels heavier than fighting. Vera reached for her hand, held it tight. That's because standing means you're not carrying just your own weight. You're carrying everyone's. But that's the kind of strength people remember. For a long time, Emily sat in the silence of the barn, her grandmother's hand warm in hers, the smell of hay and earth wrapping around them. And for the first time in weeks, she let her head lean against Vera's shoulder. Because even soldiers need somewhere to rest. Friday came too soon. The courthouse hearing had ended, but the fight hadn't. The valley buzzed with tension, ranchers checking locks twice, veterans walking fence lines, families whispering about what would happen next. And Emily Carter, sitting at her grandmother's kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee gone cold, knew one truth clearer than ever. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about who bent and who didn't. And once again, she was the one standing at the center. The place she'd sworn she'd never stand again. Why did the night feel sharper than the day? The valley slept, but Emily Carter did not. She walked the fence line with Juan Ramirez, boots crunching over frost-hardened grass. Their breath puffed white under the moonlight. The stars above burned cold, silent witnesses. Every sound carried too far: the snap of twigs, the distant call of an owl, the hum of an engine that wasn't there. Emily gripped her rifle, not raised, not pointed, just carried. It wasn't for show. It was for steadiness, the way a drowning man might cling to driftwood. "They're testing us," Juan muttered, scanning the fields. Emily nodded. "I know the rhythm, small probes, then more." Juan looked sideways at her, the moon catching the scar at his temple. "You think they'll stop before it breaks?" Emily's lips pressed thin. "No, men like Westfield don't stop. They escalate until someone else bends." The silence between them grew heavy, because both of them knew what happened when people refused to bend. By morning the message arrived, not words, not even a voice. A fire. Carl Foster's hardware store gutted overnight. Flames had chewed through the walls, the roof collapsed into blackened ash. Nothing left but smoke rising like a warning. The deputies stood around, taking notes with the indifference of men who'd already decided it was an accident. Carl's face was ash-streaked, his eyes bloodshot but burning with rage. "This wasn't kids," he growled. "This was a match and a message." Emily stood beside him, jaw clenched, shoulders stiff. She knew what he wanted to do. She knew because she wanted to do it too. But she forced her voice steady. "If we swing back, they win. They want us reckless. They want us branded dangerous. Don't give them the excuse." Carl spat into the ash. "You talk restraint while they burn us out. How long before restraint just means surrender?" Emily swallowed hard, because she didn't have an easy answer. That evening the Copper Dollar's back room buzzed hotter than before. The veterans were restless. The younger ranchers were furious. They burned Carl out. "They're cutting lines, killing stock, torching businesses. And we just keep sitting on our hands." Emily sat at the head of the table this time, though she hadn't asked for it. The room had made its choice without words. Her face was shadowed, her hands folded, her body still. Finally she spoke. "I know what it feels like to want to strike back. I've been there, overseas, here. It's the same heat in your chest, the same fire in your blood. But the minute we give in, the fight changes. We stop defending and start attacking. And that's exactly the line they want us to cross." Her words pressed against the room, but they didn't cool it. Frank Torres leaned forward, his ranger's eyes sharp. "So what's your plan then, Emily? Because holding still while they burn us won't last." Emily's jaw tightened. "My plan is discipline. We watch. We document. We make sure the county sees what's happening, not what they're trying to paint us as." The room simmered with disagreement. Some nodded, others scowled. Carl slammed his fist against the table. "My store's gone, Emily. My family's living out of a trailer tonight. Don't tell me to sit on my hands." Emily's chest ached. She opened her mouth, stopped, tried again. "I'm not telling you to sit. I'm telling you to stand, steady, together. If we scatter, if we swing wild, they'll crush us." Carl's glare cut sharp, but he said nothing. The silence was worse than shouting. Later, outside under the cold wash of starlight, Emily leaned against the tavern wall, her pulse pounding. Juan lit a cigarette, the ember glowing in the dark. "You can't hold them forever," he said. "I know. They're angry, and anger doesn't wait." Emily closed her eyes, breathing deep. I'm not just holding them, I'm holding myself. Juan exhaled smoke, studying her. And how long before you snap? Emily opened her eyes, gaze steady. When I do, it won't be for me. The next night, the danger came closer. Emily woke to the sound of tires crunching gravel. Headlights swept across the ranch yard, blinding through the curtains. She was already on her feet, rifle in hand, before Vera stirred. Juan was outside shouting. Dogs barked wild. Two trucks idled at the gate, engines growling. Shapes moved inside, shadows of men watching. No words, no shouts, just the silent message of presence. Emily stepped out onto the porch, rifle slung but visible. Her silhouette in the floodlight, steady, unflinching. She didn't raise the weapon, didn't need to. She just stood. Minutes stretched, engines hummed. Then, without a word, the trucks peeled away into the dark, gravel spitting under their tires. Vera stepped out behind her, robe pulled tight against the cold. They'll keep coming, she whispered. Emily didn't take her eyes off the dark road. I know. By Thursday, the fight moved back to words. Westfield called a press conference at the county hall. Cameras crowded, microphones lifted. His voice rolled, polished as ever. Our project represents progress, unity, prosperity. But certain groups insist on resisting. Dangerous groups, armed groups. We cannot allow threats to dictate the future of this valley. The cameras caught every word. The reporters scribbled. Emily watched the broadcast from the tavern with the veterans. Her stomach twisted. He was winning not with fire, not with threats, with story. And story travels faster than truth. She felt the eyes on her again, waiting. That night she sat on the porch, boots planted firm, hands tight around her coffee mug. Vera sat beside her, silent at first. The wind moved through the cottonwoods, whispering like ghosts. You can't win both fights, Vera said softly. Emily turned. What do you mean? Out there in the dark you can hold them back. Fence lines, truck lights, threats. But here, she tapped the newspaper in her lap, Westfield's face smiling from the front page. This is the fight they've chosen. The one they know you hate. The one you can't shoot your way through. Emily swallowed hard. I'm not built for speeches. Vera's eyes softened. You're built for truth. Sometimes truth doesn't need polish. Sometimes it just needs someone steady enough to stand and speak it. Emily looked out into the dark fields. She didn't answer, because she wasn't sure she could. The next day, the copper dollar was fuller than ever. The tension had cracked the valley wide open. People who had never taken sides before now stood on one. Carl, scarred by fire and loss, wanted fight. Old Pete wanted patience. Frank wanted structure. The younger ranchers wanted action. And all of them turned again to her. Emily's chest ached. Her breath came heavy. She wanted to tell them she couldn't carry it, that she was done, that she had buried this part of herself for a reason. But when she looked around the room, at the faces, at the scars, at the eyes burning with hope they didn't want to admit, she knew the truth. Leadership wasn't something you chose. It was something that landed. And once it landed, it didn't let go. Emily drew in a long breath. Her voice came steady. They want us to break. They want us to swing wild, but we won't. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not at all. We'll stand. Not because it's easy, but because it's the only way we win. The room quieted, the storm bent. For now. That night Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The war in her head raged louder than the one in the valley. You can't hold them forever. You can't save everyone. You'll break. Her chest tightened, her breath caught. But then she heard Vera's voice, soft and steady in her memory. Dignity doesn't shout, it just stands. And Emily whispered into the dark, not sure if it was prayer or defiance. Then I'll keep standing. Even if it broke her. Why did the silence feel like the countdown before a storm? Friday morning dawned cold, the kind of sharp chill that cut through flannel and bone alike. Emily Carter stood on the porch watching fog crawl low over the pasture. The air was too still, too heavy. She felt mornings like this before, half a world away. Mornings when the air itself seemed to wait for the crack of rifles. Vera stepped out beside her, mug steaming in her hands. Her voice was quiet but steady. "You can feel it too, can't you?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't have to, because the truth was written all over her face. By mid-morning, word spread fast. 2 ranches hid in the night, fences cut, stock scattered, barns spray-painted with threats scrawled in black. Sell or else. The deputies shrugged again, more paperwork, more shrugs. But this time, the victims weren't just ranchers. One was the Jacksons, a family that had supported Westfield's project from the start. Emily's chest tightened when she heard. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was misdirection. Divide and fracture the valley, pit neighbor against neighbor, muddy the truth until nobody knew who the real enemy was. It was the oldest play in the book. And it was working. By evening, the copper dollar was boiling. "They hit the Jacksons now," Carl growled, fists clenched. "That's not just threats, that's war." "They want us pointing fingers," Emily said, her voice low but sharp. "They want the valley split in two, fighting each other instead of them." Frank Torres shook his head. "Emily, people are scared. You keep telling us to stand still, but how long before stillness looks like weakness?" Her jaw tightened. Stillness isn't weakness, it's discipline, and discipline wins campaigns. But even as she said it, her chest ached, because she could feel it, discipline slipping through the cracks. That night, headlights swept across the ranch again, but this time they didn't idle at the gate. They came through. Engines roared, tires tore through gravel. Emily was out the door before the dogs barked, rifle in her hands, heart pounding. 2 trucks skidded into the yard. Doors slammed. Figures spilled out, 4, maybe 5, shadows moving fast. Faces hidden under ball caps, voices low, sharp, purposeful. Emily raised her voice, strong and cutting. "You're trespassing, leave now." The figures paused just long enough for the silence to burn. Then one of them laughed, cold. "Or what?" Her finger hovered near the trigger. The weight of it pulled at her. Every muscle in her body screamed to squeeze, to end the threat before it began. But she didn't. She held. The standoff stretched, until Juan stepped from the shadows, shotgun leveled, voice like stone. She said, "Leave." The figures froze. Tension cracked the air. And then, just as sudden as they'd come, they retreated, clambering back into trucks, tires spitting gravel, engines fatting into the dark. Emily lowered her rifle, her hands trembling despite herself. Juan's eyes cut to her. "You almost fired." Her chest heaved. "I wanted to." The next morning, the story hit the radio before she'd even poured coffee. "Armed standoff at the Carter Ranch," the announcer's voice declared. "Sources claim shots were nearly fired. How long before this escalates into violence?" Emily slammed the radio off. Her throat burned, her pulse thundered. They weren't just pushing anymore. They were framing, painting her, painting them all as the threat. And it was working. At the Copper Dollar that night, the room was hotter than it had ever been. Faces red, voices raised, chairs scraping against wood. "They came onto your land. You had every right to fire. Waiting only makes us targets. They'll keep pushing until someone bleeds. Why wait until it's one of us?" Emily sat stiff, her jaw clenched, eyes burning. Finally she stood. The room fell quiet. "I know what you all want," she said, voice tight. "I want it too, but if we fire first we lose everything. They want us to break, they want blood, don't give it to them." Carl stood, his voice raw. "And if they draw it first? What then, Emily? You keep telling us to stand still, but sometimes standing still just means waiting to be cut down. Her throat closed. She couldn't answer right away because Carl wasn't wrong. She thought of Afghanistan, of waiting too long, of men lost because she hadn't pulled the trigger in time. Her voice came finally, softer but sharp. If they draw first, then we stand together and we end it. The room went still. Not agreement, not rejection, just the heavy silence of men and women weighing the cost of what she just promised. Later that night, Juan found her outside again, leaning against her truck, staring at the stars. "You're breaking," he said quietly. She didn't look at him. "I don't know how much longer I can hold them." Juan lit a cigarette, the ember glowing. "Then maybe don't hold them, maybe lead them." Emily's jaw worked. "I swore I'd never lead again." Juan's voice was soft but cutting. "Sometimes you don't get to choose." Her chest tightened. "Leadership costs too much." He blew smoke into the night. "So does silence." By Sunday, Westfield struck his hardest blow yet. The Gazette ran a full-page ad, glossy, polished, her name printed in bold. Emily Carter, soldier or threat. Beneath it, a blurred photo from the courthouse, her hand on the rifle at the range, her posture sharp, eyes fierce. The article twisted her words, painted her as dangerous, painted the veterans as unstable, painted the entire community as a militia in waiting. Vera read it in silence, then folded the paper carefully and set it aside. Her face was calm, but her eyes shimmered. "They've made you the symbol now," she said. Emily's chest ached. "I never wanted to be a symbol." Her grandmother's voice was steady. "Symbols don't choose themselves, people choose them." Emily turned away, her throat closing. "I can't carry this." Vera reached across the table, her hand firm over Emily. "You already are." That night Emily stood at the fence line alone, rifle slung across her shoulder, eyes scanning the dark. She thought of the veterans' faces, the way they'd turned to her. She thought of the ranchers, the families, the children. She thought of Carl's fire, Pete's caution, Juan's quiet truth. And she thought of Westfield, smiling, polished, sharp. Her chest burned. She whispered into the cold air, voice low but fierce. "You want me broken, you'll have to take everything first." The wind carried her words into the dark. And for the first time, Emily felt not just the weight of the fight, but the shape of the choice waiting ahead. A choice she'd tried her whole life to avoid. And one she knew she could no longer run from. Why did the dawn feel like it was holding its breath? The valley lay quiet that morning, too quiet. The fog rolled thick across the pastures, wrapping fences and barns in pale gray. Emily Carter stood on the porch, rifle slung but untouched. Her coffee steamed, bitter and black, but she hadn't tasted it. She was listening, always listening. She'd barely slept. Every sound in the night had felt like a test. A truck on the highway, a dog barking, the shift of cattle in the field. Her nerves were stretched thin, but her body was steady. Years of soldiering had taught her how to function on edge. But this wasn't combat. Not exactly, it was something worse. Because in combat, you knew who the enemy was. Here, the enemy wore smiles and shook hands at the courthouse, even as they sent shadows into the night. By mid-morning, word spread across the valley again. Another raid, not fire this time, not fences, people. Old Pete, the quiet veteran with the cane, had been run off the road. His truck lay in a ditch, windows smashed, cane broken in two beside the gravel. He lived barely, bruised, cut, shaken, but the message was clear. It wasn't just intimidation anymore, it was assault. Emily drove to the scene, tires grinding gravel. She found Pete sitting on the back of an ambulance, face bloodied, eyes burning with shame. "They didn't even hide," he muttered. "Didn't care who saw, they know the sheriff won't touch 'em." Emily's throat tightened. She crouched beside him, her hand steady on his shoulder. "They wanted to scare you." Pete's eyes, clouded but sharp, cut to hers. They wanted to scare you. The words hit like a bullet, because he was right. That evening the copper dollar overflowed. Rage shook the room. Ranchers shouted, veterans slammed fists, voices cracked with anger and fear. "This ain't defense anymore," Carl roared. "They put Pete in a ditch. They'll kill one of us next." "They already tried," someone else shouted. The storm swelled, threatening to break, and as always the eyes turned to Emily. Her chest ached with the weight. She wanted to tell them she couldn't do it anymore, that she was only one woman, that she'd already carried too much. But the silence demanded. She stood. Her voice cut through the clamor, sharp, controlled. "They want us reckless. They want us to lash out. That's their trap. If we take the bait, we lose everything. But—" She paused, her eyes sweeping the room, catching Carl's fury, Frank's impatience, Juan's steady gaze, Vera's quiet worry in the back. "If they come again, if they cross that line one more time, we hold, together, and we don't let them pass." The room fell silent. It wasn't a call to arms, it wasn't surrender, it was something heavier, a promise. The kind of promise that binds people not just in resolve, but in risk. 2 nights later, the storm broke. Engines roared down the valley road. Headlights cut through fog. Trucks rolled hard toward the Carter ranch, not stopping at the gate this time, not slowing. Emily was already on the porch, rifle across her chest, heart steady despite the thunder in her veins. Juan stood to her right, shotgun ready. Carl, Frank, and a dozen more ranchers lined the fence. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder, silent, immovable. The convoy screeched to a halt in the yard, gravel spraying. Doors slammed. Men poured out, faces hard, hands gripping pipes, chains, bats. One of them called out, voice dripping with arrogance. "This is your last chance, Carter. Sell or we'll take it anyway." Emily's voice carried back, clear, unwavering. "This land isn't for sale, not to you, not ever." The men advanced, slow, threatening, the kind of slow that said they believed fear would make her bend. But Emily didn't bend. She stepped forward, planting herself between the mob and her people. Her rifle stayed lowered, but her eyes burned. "You cross this line," she said, voice sharp as steel, "you'll answer to all of us." And then, as if the valley itself had chosen the moment, the crowd behind her rose. Dozens of hands lifted, not with weapons, but with signs, flags, cameras. Neighbors, families, even the quiet ones who had never spoken out before. Westfield's men froze, their swagger faltering. Cameras clicked, phones recorded. The story that had been painted in shadows was now laid bare in the light. Emily felt it, the shift. The mob had expected fear. Instead, they found witness. And witness was harder to crush than walls. The standoff stretched. Minutes dragged like hours. Then slowly the men backed away. One curse, one spit into the dirt, one slammed truck door. Engines revved, tires screamed, and the convoy pulled back into the fog. Emily didn't lower her rifle until the last headlight disappeared. The crowd behind her exhaled as one, the sound of a valley that had been holding its breath. Vera stepped forward, her hand warm on Emily's shoulder. Her voice was soft, but it carried. "You stood." Emily swallowed hard, her throat tight, her chest burning. "We all did." The days that followed blurred. The Gazette shifted. The radio softened. Even the deputies, forced by witness and pressure, could no longer shrug the truth away. Westfield's shadow thinned, his charm cracking. But Emily didn't celebrate. She couldn't. Because she knew the cost. Carl's store still ash, Pete's truck still wrecked, families still shaken, trust still scarred. Victory wasn't triumph, it was endurance. And endurance always left marks. Weeks later, the valley was quieter. The ranch still stood. The fields still rolled golden in the wind. But Emily had changed. She walked the fence line at dawn, not with the tension of waiting, but with the weight of memory. One evening, As the sun bled orange across the mountains, Vera joined her on the porch. "You never wanted this fight," Vera said softly. Emily shook her head. "No, but it came anyway." Her grandmother's eyes softened. "And you carried it, not with fists, not with bullets, with something heavier." Emily turned, brow furrowed. "What's heavier than bullets?" Vera's hand rested on hers. "Dignity." Emily's chest tightened, her eyes burning. She looked out at the fields, the cattle, the land that had cost so much to defend. And for the first time, she let herself breathe. Because the war hadn't ended. Wars never truly did. But here on this soil, in this valley, there was still something worth standing for. Not out of rage, not out of vengeance, but out of love. Love for land, love for family, love for the dignity that refuses to bend, even when bending would be easier. As the last light faded, Emily whispered into the quiet. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't shout, it simply stands." And in that moment, the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was whole. It was hers.